This is Team Rocket, one of the biggest and most evil team organizations in the entire Pokemon universe, with one goal in mind: to steal powerful Pokemon and rule the world. And these three, Jessie, James, and Meowth, are at the center of it. But they weren't always evil.
James was raised in a super rich environment with money, butlers, pets, and two loving parents, so I wonder how he turned to a life of crime. And Meowth was just a regular cat roaming the streets of Hollywood trying to find his purpose. But Jessie, her story is a lot more complicated.
When Jessie was a little girl, she grew up extremely poor in the middle of this random snow village, and she had no friends. It may look like she has a table full of food, but this is legitimately all snow. But the thing is, Jessie was happy. She loved this part of her childhood, and she loved the snow-made meals made by her mom. But speaking of Jessie's mom, she wasn't an ordinary villager. She was actually the right hand of the original founder of Team Rocket, and that would happen to be Madame Boss, which is Giovanni's mother. It is said that Madame Boss was pretty ruthless and had one goal in mind: to find and capture rare Pokemon. One day, Jessie's mom was on a mission, and she ended up finding information about a Pokemon known as Mew. Miss Miyamoto ended up going to her boss, letting her know that this rare Pokemon does exist and it's probably the founder of all the original Pokemon. When Madame Boss heard this, she got pretty hyped, so much to the point that she put Jessie's mom, Miss Miyamoto, at the head of the mission to finding Mew. But this mission would be pretty long, and Miss Miyamoto has obligations at home since she has a kid, right? Once Jessie's mom realized she was on the mission to find Mew, she ended up putting Jessie into foster care. Now, I won't lie, Jessie's mom has to be one of the worst mothers in all of anime, because she's a part of this super rich evil organization, but she lets her child live in poverty, and the second she can get a bigger bag, she ends up ditching her child, never seeing her again. All of this had some pretty big effects on Jessie, since she was so young when all of this happened, and she never saw her mom again. You may be wondering what happened to Jessie's mom, and on the mission where she went searching for Mew, they ended up encountering Mew with her squad, but Mew ended up killing them by causing an avalanche. I will say there is a small chance that Jessie's mom is alive, since Giovanni ended up getting a report from her years later, but we'll never know. Everything was looking pretty rough for Jessie, but her story somehow manages to get even worse. Even though Jessie was now an orphan, she still had to go to school, so she went there like everybody else, and she made a few friends, and she wanted to become a pop star idol. She trained really hard for this every single day and thought that her and her group of friends would all make it in the industry. While all this was going on, she ended up having a crush on this boy named Austin. While they were walking home together, he let Jessie know that his dream was to become a Pokemon coordinator, and he's gonna move far away for it, and he asked if Jessie could come along on the journey with him. Jessie was pretty conflicted about this, since her goal was to become a pop star and her main audition is a few days away, so she declined Austin's offer. Austin took it well, and he left, and when Jessie went to her audition, she was the only one out of her group to fail. All her other friends got in, and she just didn't get in. This ended up haunting Jessie a lot, since she always wondered what would have happened if she went with Austin and never went for this pop star dream. Now, even though all of Jessie's dreams were crushed, she wanted to at least try to be a Pokemon nurse, and when she went to try to go to nursing school, they rejected her. So she did the next best thing and go to the Chansey nursing school to try to get in through there. In this school, Jessie was having a really hard time, since this school is meant for Pokemon, but one of the Chanseys took a liking to Jessie. All the other ones definitely did not like Jessie though, since they set her up during a test by using the Pokemon move Sing to put her to sleep to make her seem like a lazy student. But it didn't matter though. Jessie was grinding through nursing school and had her friend Chansey, and when it was graduation night and it was time for Jessie to graduate, she ended up not going to it. She felt like she didn't deserve to graduate with the rest of the Chanseys, and she wanted to go off to do her own thing. But one of the Chanseys ended up coming up to Jessie, which was her friend, and splitting their graduation necklace in half so Jessie will always have a part of her. And after that, Jessie went around to do a lot of small jobs before she ended up going to her first day working at Team Rocket. But we gotta talk about James now to figure out how they all came together. When James was young, he wasn't like Jessie, quite the opposite. He lived in a pretty rich family, and at such a young age, for some reason, his parents wanted him to have an arranged marriage with someone known as Jezebel, and James did not rock rock with this girl at all. Mainly because of the fact Jezebel wanted James to be super high class, being way too fancy and thinking everything James does is ridiculous, and she basically wanted to change James entirely as a person. James kept trying to make it clear that he doesn't want to get into a relationship with this person, but nobody seemed to care. The only friend James seemed to have was his pet, Growlithe. All of this pressure was bothering James so much that him and Growly ended up running away one day, and the weather conditions were way too harsh that James ended up passing out, and Growly was out there howling, trying to save James's life. Because of all this, James decided to run away from the upperclassman life. He wanted nothing to do with it, and he did quite the opposite. He would rather be poor and happy than rich and sad. And all of this ended up leading James to his first day of Team Rocket training camp. But there's still Meowth, who currently is having a pretty hard time. The biggest mystery behind Meowth is why he can talk, and we end up learning that in his past, it's not because he's some mythical rare Pokemon, it's because he wanted to impress a girl, so he learned how to speak to seem high class. When Meowth was a kitten, he would always get into trouble. He would always get caught for trying to steal food, but he always wanted to live the high class life. For Meowth to survive, he had to do a lot of stealing, and he ended up joining a gang of Meowths, with the leader being a Persian, to steal food every single day from civilians. This kept happening for a while, Meowth being a thief, but one day he ended up seeing this female Meowth that was really high class. When Meowth tried to go up to her and talk to her, the Meowth's owner hit Meowth on the head, saying that this cat cannot deal with any stray thuggy kittens, and that she only deals with high class cats. Then in Meowth language, the other cat ended up confirming this, telling Meowth that she would never deal with a broke cat. She needs a rich one that can buy her whatever she wants, and not someone like Meowth. So I don't even know what Meowth sees in this girl, since clearly she only likes money. But because of this, Meowth started changing everything about himself. He started learning how to walk upright so he'd be seen as mature, and he started learning how to speak so that he would also be seen as cool and unique. And he actually ended up learning. This Meowth grinded hard to act like a human. But this is exactly why you don't change for other people, because when Meowth ended up pulling up on her block, feeling all nice, thinking that he would finally impress her, she was even more freaked out, calling Meowth a freak, cussing him out, saying that now he's an awkward version between a Pokemon and a human, and there's no way she could ever deal with anyone like him. And Meowth's world fell apart. That was the last day he ended up seeing her for a while, and Meowth's gang also kicked him out, since now he's some weird awkward version of a human. But this isn't the last time we see them. We see them later on in the story, but that's a little later. For now though, Meowth is roaming the streets, trying to figure out his purpose in life, and he ends up stumbling across Team Rocket and joining their organization. When Meowth first joined, walking to Team Rocket headquarters, he ended up meeting Giovanni and Persian, and he let them know that he really wants to join and he thinks that he'll be useful. Persian ended up taking a massive liking to Meowth, and they ended up assigning Meowth to the training. Meanwhile, Jessie was training at the same time at this organization, but she was having trouble getting her group together. Most people in this organization ended up having 2 people and 1 Pokemon in a group, and no one was really compatible with Jessie. This was getting so bad since Jessie was gaining the reputation of being unworkable with. The Team Rocket boss that was training Jessie gave her one last chance and thought that there would be one person that's compatible with her, and that would happen to be James. Now, they didn't really get along at first, since Jessie has been mistreated her entire life, so she had such a hard time trusting people around her that she really just wanted to do things her own way. While Jessie was sorting out her trust issues, Meowth ended up joining their group, and they had their first mission to survive the night out in the wilderness. Throughout this entire mission, Jessie was completely carrying. She was the only one locked in, while James and Meowth were lagging behind, but they still had a pretty good heart. The one problem though is that James and Meowth were starving while Jessie had food, and instead of her being greedy, she ended up splitting the food 3 ways amongst her teammates, and this completely gained their trust. They ended up loving Jessie. Later that night, James ended up confessing to Jessie, saying that he wants to travel with her and Meowth, and they think they can make the best team ever, and he just wants to know why Jessie doesn't really like them. Jessie ends up letting James know that she's had a pretty tough life and it's hard to trust people, but she's willing to give them a chance. The next day when they woke up, they continued their mission to get to the top of this tower to steal this red Snorlax. And when James, Jessie, and Meowth ended up breaking into the tower and they were close to capturing the red Snorlax, James and Meowth ended up falling for a trap. They were about to fall into a hole, but Jessie ended up saving them. James told Jessie to just go ahead and capture the red Snorlax so that she can become a Team Rocket member, member, but Jessie lets James and Meowth know that she's never gonna ditch them. In the end, Jessie ends up dragging them out the hole, they end up getting the red Snorlax, and they all end up graduating, finally becoming Team Rocket members. After this, some time has passed, and they are well integrated into Team Rocket society, which takes us to the second episode of the Pokemon anime, where they first meet Ash and become crazy stalkers wanting to catch his Pikachu at all costs. Eventually, on Ash's journey, they're walking down a street, and they end up seeing a missing sign of a kid that looks like James. When they go to investigate the house, the butler lets them know that James's parents are now dead, and James went missing so many years ago. They say that their dying wish was to give James the estate, but they can't find him since he's gone. And Ash and the gang do know where James is since they've been stalking him the entire time, and when they end up meeting up with James, he says he doesn't really want to go to their funeral. He has severe amnesia and doesn't really remember much. Now, most good friends would probably leave you alone since this is a pretty traumatic event, but Jessie and Meowth did not care and forced James to claim the estate. But don't feel too bad for James, because the second he goes into the house, they end up learning that James's parents are actually alive, and it was a trick to bring James back to the house so he'd be forced to marry Jezebel. When James and Jezebel talk again for the first time, James realizes now more than ever this was never gonna work out. They're just not compatible. Jezebel seems pretty chill and tells James to come down to the basement to get his inheritance, and when he ends up going down, James gets jumped by Jezebel and James's parents. Jezebel literally has a whip, destroying the entire place, saying she's going to whip James into shape. So what the hell was going on back then in the Pokemon anime? Also, if you made it this far, let's pull a prank on the comment section for this week's secret message. Let's try to convince them that Jessie, James, and Meowth are just not a part of Team Rocket. So comment something like, Meowth is my favorite Team Aqua member, or James is my favorite Team Galactic member, and hopefully by the end of it, the comments look like a dumpster fire. When James thought it was all over, his old friend Growly ended up coming and saving James, and they ended up escaping the estate. In the end though, Growly did want to tag along with James on his adventures, but James told Growly he should stay behind and take care of his parents since James is technically a criminal living a scummy life and Growly is a high-class dog, and Growly completely understood this and said that they'll meet again. In later seasons though, we do end up learning that James originally did have feelings for Jezebel. When he was a kid, Jezebel was actually his first love, and he wrote a whole letter about it too. They were so close to actually sealing the deal, except Jezebel told James that he has to get rid of his Growly since it's a dirty Pokemon. And since James is a smart guy and would never abandon his Pokemon, he called the whole thing off and abandoned Jezebel and never liked her after that again. James and Growly end up reuniting again in the Sinnoh season, where James sees him at a vacation home that they had a while ago, so it's pretty nice to see this dog is doing well. Speaking of people reuniting, Jessie managed to meet up with the Chansey that was nice to her in nursing school, and this Chansey is now a Blissey, and she still keeps the charm around her neck to remind her of Jessie, and Jessie still keeps the charm too. Blissey never ended up joining Jessie's team, but it's nice to see that they still remember each other. But in a future episode, Meowth ends up visiting the ghetto that he grew up in, and he realized that everything is run down. He was trying to find his old gang, and he ended up finding them, but they now wanted Meowth to rejoin the gang since he seems pretty well up in Team Rocket. Meowth says that he loves his position at Team Rocket and that he would never join back this gang, but then the leader of the gang, Persian, ended up showing him that they have Meowth's old crush held hostage in this gang, and Meowth realizes that something's off. She's not rich anymore. Meowsy is completely poor. They end up chatting it out, and Meowsy lets Meowth know that her old owner went broke and threw her onto the street, and she had nowhere to go, so she ended up joining the gang. She said she had no choice and she didn't want to join the gang, but it was the only option she had or she would have died. And Meowth is devastated by this for some reason, even though Meowsy treated her like garbage in the past, and Meowth wants to get her out of this situation. Meowth ends up getting Team Rocket to come and fight off all of the other Meowths, and Meowth is gonna have a 1v1 with Persian for Meowsy. They end up having a pretty fierce battle, and they both go for a finishing slash, and it looks like Meowth lost, but he still stood up and Persian fell. Meowth was the winner, and Meowsy was finally free, until everyone realized that Meowsy wanted Meowth to lose, and she was rooting for Persian the whole time since she likes Persian. Now, this man Meowth could not catch a break because he ends up jumping their whole organizations, quote-unquote saving Meowsy just for her to be preying on his downfall the entire time. To make things worse, Meowsy says that her and Meowth would never work out in the first place and that Meowth is still a freak. Meowth was pretty heartbroken from this, but it's a pretty good lesson to not change for others since they'll never like you in the end anyways. From here, here Team Rocket's goal is just dead set on capturing Ash's Pikachu, but why do they want this Pikachu specifically? You'll have to click the video on your screen where I talk about the complete story of Ash's Pikachu to figure out why they became stalkers.